This episode is in collaboration with the Final Nail podcast. Hello, I'm Meena Green, your guide in all things death and burial. We all know how complicated and expensive dying can be, but what if you have a few extra stone? As a death enthusiast and someone with a family who suffers from obesity and obesity-related illnesses, I was thinking a lot about the difficulties that could occur with dying obese, especially now with body positivity and health at every size influencers popping up on my social media feeds. I spoke to Daniel Ackerley.
And we've got to kind of get that coffin safely onto the pudlocks across the grave and then safely down into the grave itself.
A funeral director, and Scott Grigsby.
25% of the UK adult nation are now deemed to be clinically obese.
An embalmer, to find out what it means to die obese.
As a funeral director, the most important thing to us at all times is to maintain the dignity of the deceased person. From the moment that they pass away and come into our care, right up until the day of the committal, whether that's cremation or burial.
A committal is a short ceremony before the burial or cremation as a way to say your final goodbyes.
And of course, people pass away in all sorts of contexts and places. People could be upstairs in their own bed at home, with a spiral staircase for us to negotiate. People could pass in hospital or professional care like a hospice or a nursing home.
Embalming is very, very similar to the clinical practice of a blood transfusion. So with a regular death where someone was expected to pass away, where there's been no further coronial investigations or anything like that, often what would happen is that an injection site is raised through using the arterial system of the body. That injection of a preservative disinfectant solution is introduced to the cardiovascular system of the body, whereby circulation is achieved.
The injection sites are the carotid artery and jugular vein.
That is where we then get the difficulties with the larger cases, larger patients that come to us, whereby circulation can be restricted because of the physical size of them when we are laying near the gravitational forces that push down on our vessels. Sometimes can then occlude some of the vessels where we're trying to achieve the circulation. But effectively, that's what we're doing. It takes the form of injection. And at the same point, we would look to remove the venous drainage from the vein or from the heart itself, because that's the waste product. That's the part that we're trying to sanitize.
Venous drainage is returning deoxygenated blood and waste from tissue and organs back to the heart. During an embalming, this is done by inserting a drain tube into the jugular vein and pumping embalming fluid into the carotid artery.
And to effectively restore a more natural lifelike appearance that remains aseptic, and that sort of sanitation, preservation, and ultimately presentation for the family as well.
I think the greatest challenge is that point of removal where the person is brought into our care and the person's died at home. Because when we get to that house, we've often got little knowledge as to where in that home that person is, what the circumstances of the house is, the size of the person who has passed away. And obviously if somebody has died upstairs, that's a real logistical issue as to how to get the person down the stairs, how to negotiate tight corners and things like that in a very, very dignified way. So we always try and get as much information as we can if it's appropriate, because often when people ring us to say that somebody's passed away, they're very, very upset and don't want to think about the logistical issues and to think, well, actually, my mum or dad's a very, very large person.
It's very rare that information is ever forthcoming. Particularly, people don't always just pass away within hospital environments. There are community deaths, for instance, and tragic circumstances also. So it's not until often that the embalmer first comes face to face. The funeral homes, people we work for, often will then have that information to pass that on, but it's not something that you hear of prior to meeting, and very often it's not a subject that's discussed by funeral directors with the families they serve.
And of course, the other consideration is the care of our staff. Because if you go out in the middle of the night with two people and it's clear that the person is very, very large and very heavy, that isn't safe for two people. So we'd need to then bring other people in and make sure that we have the right equipment to carry out that removal in a dignified way. So that's the first part of the person's care. We then have to prepare the person for viewing for the day of their funeral. And actually here we have lots of equipment. We have lifts and hoists which are designed to keep the person's dignity.
The challenge we face is 25% of the UK adult nation are now deemed to be clinically obese. So it's quite a rare occurrence now. So what used to be maybe become 20, 30 years ago, something more of a challenge, it's the accepted norm. And most practicing embalmers will be just dealing with this as a day in, day out sort of caseload. And they've just learned to adapt. Occasionally, if someone's incredibly large, you may need to call upon additional assistance within the mortuary. Most embalmers often work either on their own or will have a co-worker nearby who can support with any physical challenges or manoeuvring the deceased. But, we're very blessed now with mortuaries that have hoists and things. So everything is geared up for dealing with larger patients that will come into our embalming theatres.
We then have the day of the funeral, and in the northeast it's always our practice and our custom to carry people at shoulder level. We shoulder coffins here. Other parts of the country don't anymore, and they use what's called a wheeled bier.
A wheeled bier, spelt B-I-E-R, is a frame a coffin is placed on before burial or cremation. Or they can also be used to carry the coffin to the burial site, or in this case, wheel the coffin to the burial site.
But we try and carry where we can. So if somebody is just a little bit on the heavy side, then what we would tend to do is bring in extra bearers, so that we would have 6 bearers rather than 4 bearers. And if we felt that it wasn't safe for either the person or for our staff to carry at shoulder level, we'd use a wheeled bier with a purple velvet pall over. So it still looks important and something very special. So even if we can't carry at shoulder level, we still try and maintain that sense of gravitas, that sense of occasion for people, because it is a momentous occasion in the life of this person and the life of this family. If it's cremation, we've also got to bear in mind the size of the cremators, because, crematoriums have got different sized cremators. So it's important that we know in advance whether that crematorium can safely accommodate that coffin. Because what we don't want to happen is have a situation where we turn up and the coffin is too large to go through to be cremated. That's the last thing that we want to happen for that family. So all the way through, from the moment of the person passing to the day of the funeral, we're thinking about ways in which to keep this person's dignity. On some occasions, if it's been a burial, that's particularly problematic if you've got, we're dealing with the elements outside, if it's raining and the grave is very, very big, and we've got to kind of get that coffin safely down into the grave. We actually have a lowering device here which we use, which is often used in America, where the coffin can be placed onto the lowering device, and then you press a button and it goes down very, very slowly in a dignified fashion. But if that isn't possible to use because there's not much space around the grave, then we would provide extra people to be able to handle that burial. We need extra straps to feed through the handles. And on some occasions, when the person's been particularly heavy, particularly large coffin, I've said to the family, why don't we just keep you back at the cemetery for a couple of moments as we take care of your mum and place her safely into the grave, and then we'll gather round and have a service. Because often everybody who's at that service, the family are aware of the size of their loved one. They're aware of the size of the coffin. And the last thing they want to do is to kind of be watching, thinking, are they going to manage? Will they be okay? Are they going to drop my mum? And thank goodness that's never happened, touch wood. So it's about protecting the family. We don't want their guests also watching on. So we just try and have that sense of giving them the option all of the way through funeral arrangements, whether it's, somebody who is very obese or somebody who's very small. The wishes of the family are paramount. We actually have a very, very good coffin supplier, very locally to us. We're very fortunate in that respect, that we're not waiting for days and days for coffins to arrive. So basically, everybody who comes into our care is measured by us. Whether or not they've been measured by the hospital staff who died at the hospital, one of the first things that we do for somebody is to measure them. And we will make sure that there is a coffin or a casket suitable for them, that's comfortable for them. The last thing we would ever do is to try and place somebody in a coffin that's too tight for them. If somebody's particularly large, I think it's about 30 inches. I think if people are above 30 inches, we go to a casket shape, which means that the coffin isn't tapered at the shoulders in a traditional English coffin is, and it's more of a rectangular shape, which is the custom in places like America. Everybody goes in a casket. I'm not a joiner or a coffin maker, but I'm told that the rectangular shape is more solid, the way that's built. And there's also a solid wood base rather than a plywood base. It's a solid base. So we've got every confidence that coffin is safe to be used for that person.
A big thank you to Daniel and Scott for sharing their insights and experiences. And thank you for joining us on this episode on Word on Wearside.